Hello and welcome to the Viking Code School demo for building a style sheet. So in this video we're going to take a look at positioning with absolute, relative, static, and fixed positioning. So the difference between floats and this is that floats they're going to stack elements left and right, but this with absolute positioning with absolute, relative, fixed positioning, it's just much more exact and specific. And you'll see what I mean in just a sec when we take a look here. So we have a kind of page here, normal layout that you would have for a page. We have a header, we have a sidebar, we have main content, we have a footer, and inside the main content we have a div here that's containing other divs, and we have them labeled with the type of positioning that they're using. So we have static, absolute, relative, more static, and then up here, if you didn't notice it, we actually have a fixed position div. And we can see that this actually stays in the same place as I scroll up and down on the page. And that is the behavior of a fixed position, or an element that's positioned with a value of fixed. So let's take a look at the markup and CSS for this. So we have some styles here for the main header, the footer, the layout, and everything. Square. We have relatively positioned parent. So let's take a look at where that is. We have the relatively positioned parent. It's orange, so that is the containing div here. And then inside that, we have our statically positioned white squares. We have a purple square that is positioned relatively. You can see with the different IDs here, rather, how they're positioned. Absolutely positioned child, that is cyan colored. And then we have a fixed position that is actually inside this relatively positioned parent. So this fixed position div is actually inside this orange div in our markup. But notice what happens to it when we apply the fixed position to it. Here. It goes all the way up here. So if I just remove this and reload the page, you can see where it actually is. This is where it originally is. But with fixed position and this value of top 32, left 32, this is what happens. It gets positioned 32 pixels from the left and top of the viewport, the entire document. So that is the effect of fixed position. And this top, left, you can also do right and bottom if you want to position from the right or bottom. You can also have negative values. But the point is that these are there to be used in conjunction with position to accurately and more granularly position elements. So let's take a look at absolute. So absolute is much like fixed, only instead it's going to look up the document tree to find the first element that is either absolutely or relatively positioned. And when it finds it, it's going to position it relative to that. And don't get confused by the fact that I'm using the word relative. Absolute position means you could think of it as it's absolutely positioning it by looking at the first parent that it finds with a position attribute of absolute or relative. So it's doing exactly that. It is right here. We have this div. It is going up the document tree. It just so happens to find the first div is the parent. So it is positioning itself 32 pixels from the top and left of that parent. Relative position. We have our relatively positioned div here. It is positioning itself relative to where it would be in normal document flow. So notice that if I were to go here, and since this is targeting this div, I could just say absolute. What do we think is going to happen? It's going to position itself right where the absolutely positioned div is. And notice that all the other divs actually change their position because I've removed this from normal document flow. So that is another property or thing to consider about relative positioning, is that the element stays in normal document flow. So notice when I change it back to relative, it stays in normal document flow. You can see that the other elements are respecting that an element is there, but it's actually been positioned 32 pixels from the top and left of where it would be. So that is the effect of relative position. So just to recap, we have, and just finally, static position is the default value. It just means that the element will be positioned according to normal document flow. So just to recap the different types of positioning, we have static, which is normal, the default value. We have fixed, which is going to position it relative to the viewport. We have absolute, which is going to position it relative to the first parent in the tree that it finds that is relatively or absolutely positioned. And then we have relative positioning, which is going to position relative to where it would be in normal document flow. So that is positioning with the position attribute or property.